Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another Bronftalk. My name's Adam Shapiro. I'm a 2009 fellow. And today we have a great conversation with Melissa Korn. Melissa is a 2001 fellow, a reporter for the Wall Street Journal covering higher education. She's been writing about the Varsity Blues college admissions cheating scandal since it broke in March 2019. And along with her journal colleague, Jennifer Levitz, together they just released the definitive book on what happened, Unacceptable, Privilege, Deceit, and the Making of the College Admissions Scandal. Melissa also covers university finances, campus culture, and how the pandemic is upending the industry. Hey, Melissa, congrats on the book launch.
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun.
So how does it feel now that it's out in the world?
It's a little bit of a relief, a little bit terrifying, but mostly exciting. This has been 15 months plus of a lot of work. So it's exciting for the world to now be able to read it and see it. And as you were saying when we were talking a little bit earlier, kind of you think you know the story until you read it, and then you realize there's just so much more craziness to it all.
Yeah, it seemed outrageous, and then you just show how much more outrageous it was. And so it's interesting because you do such a good job at outlining that sort of like there are all these jaw-dropping moments, but at the same time, you sort of tease out what this means for the larger educational system and what it means that there's a system that allows these kinds of abuses to go on or that went on for so long. So I hope we can kind of get to some of the frustratingly or jaw-dropping moments, but also what it means in a broader context. So let's start with the guy who's at the center, this guy, Rick Singer. You really kind of give us a sense of who he is. Like, how did he start out? Was he ever kind of a legitimate college counselor?
Yeah, so Singer is absolutely fascinating person who came up the ranks initially as a coach, as a basketball coach, high school and collegiate level. And then he started doing some college counseling, and he was a legitimate counselor. There were many families that we spoke with who used him, for things like figuring out what schools to apply to, what to write an essay about, tutoring on test prep, kind of the run-of-the-mill stuff. And then it kind of, he already pushed the boundaries from the beginning with some families, and he continued to push and push and push until he had these much more sophisticated and illegal approaches to college counseling. But even when he was doing that, up until this whole case came down last March, in March 2019, he was still working with clients and had his employees working with clients the very kind of plain vanilla legitimate way. So
Yeah,
he
he was
kind of
always
did
doing
both sides of it.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. And he was also sort of like consistently very charming, is how you describe him.
Yes, his personality is really what won clients over. So he was obsessed with winning. He loved to run up the score, whether it was a basketball game or be able to have this tally of, I got 17 kids into this school this year. So he was very focused on targets, on goals, and he wanted all of his clients and the kids to be as well. But he was a little rough around the edges, not super polished, didn't dress very fancy, kind of very fit, but also a little bit schlubby. Like, he'd wear a tracksuit instead of a button-down shirt or something. But people kind of liked that. It was a little bit like, oh, he's so busy, he doesn't have time to think about his appearance. And he talked about, he was a big name dropper, and in these circles that he was running in, that meant a lot, right? If he was saying, oh, I worked with X, Y, and Z, I worked with this CEO and this athlete and this actress, well, he must be good. So that brought him a lot of business.
And he saw he claimed to have seen the iPhone before anybody as a friend of Steve Jobs, right?
Yes, he claimed to have gotten, I think, a year advance look at the iPhone. And he did work with a lot of high profile people. He worked with, executives at Kleiner Perkins and Fortune 500 CEOs and Phil Mickelson and Joe Montana. And he did have a lot of those, but he often would blend fact and fiction and kind of enhance some of those numbers of just how many executives he worked with.
And to really get at the competitive streak he had, you tell this really great story of his short-lived career, but impressive career, it sounded like, coaching JCC basketball.
Yes. He made his way to Omaha, which when I came across a front page article in the Jewish press in Omaha from around early 2002 and 2001. And kind of gave me pause. Like, am I sure this is the right Rick Singer? But there was a photo of him, so we knew it was. But he was working for a call center for a little while, and a call center company, made his way to Omaha and wanted to volunteer some coaching. So, you know, a Jewish guy, he went to the JCC and asked, what can I do to help? And he started coaching a middle school team, and these practices would go to 2 or 3 hours. He would curse out the refs. He would run up the score against competitors like by 50 points, you know, for like a 7th grade boys basketball team. And then he had a high school team that was practicing for the Maccabee games. And they're pretty sure, a bunch of players are pretty sure that he actually brought in somebody from a local Catholic school as a ringer to just get the team a little bit better.
They won.
They won, and he did end up being encouraged to leave because he essentially told his boss, no, I'm not going to take my foot off the gas. This is just who I am.
You described the guy firing him like they went out for lunch after, and they he liked him as he was firing him.
Yes, exactly.
So that kind of describes who we're dealing with very well. So then, before we sort of dive into the sort of scheme that he built up, can you talk a little bit about sort of what was going on in higher education more broadly that kind of ramped up the stakes so much in the early 2000s?
Yeah, I like to think that I'm not that far out of college, but I really am. So I think the evolution of college admissions, we really saw a turning point in the 1980s when the US News and World Report started putting out its college rankings. And then all of a sudden people could see, okay, this school is definitively better than this school because it is ranked higher on the US News Report. And whether that's actually true, one can argue. I would say no. There's always the best school for one person is not the best school for another. But that kind of allowed people to start comparing their kids, their families, their own success in different ways based on where their schools landed in the rankings. That competition continued to increase and increase. More and more people are graduating from high school, so the competition for those schools that don't admit everybody increased. As one class, you know, the class of juniors would see that the students a year above them got rejected from a bunch of places, so they would think, okay, when it's my turn, I have to apply to more schools. And that vicious cycle continued to build. I had multiple people, including a Bronftalk person who studies higher education, refer to it as blood sport. And I think that says a lot about just how fierce this competition is and the pressure and the stakes, or at least that people think the stakes are that high, because ultimately they're not, and they shouldn't be. And we talk a lot in the book about why this worldview is so warped and dangerous. That, you know, there are so many very good schools that actually admit most of the applicants. There are schools that are better for certain students than for others. And just because a school is on that top 10 ranking doesn't mean it's the best school for your kid or for you. So we try to put all of the antics and all of the scheming in that context of the shift in higher ed, the shift in admissions over, you know, the entire course of Singer's career over 30 years. I think in the past, really since the financial crisis in 2008, more and more families did see this as an even more high stakes game. So we saw that amp up again. And that's really when Rick Singer was able to up his game. He moved down to Southern California where there were more rich people that he could charge these crazy prices to. And these families were willing to do anything to make sure their kids got this extra edge.
And so, and putting aside like what they went on to do, even in the families you profile, like there's this like, there was some realization about what was going on was like not healthy. Like the culture was clearly like like you tell that story about the kid who wrote the op-ed whose family was later ensnared in this, about like the culture of cheating and how if you didn't cheat, you're at a disadvantage. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. That was a fun, kind of a fun thing that we came across. The younger brother of one of the kids wrapped up in the scheme. Right around the time his brother was getting involved in all this, the younger brother wrote a piece for his high school newspaper down in the LA area about the scourge of cheating and how awful cheating was and how it would, you know, it's just unfair to the people who aren't cheating. It makes them want to cheat and feel like they need to. And yeah, these families were aware that there's something very unfair about the system, that there are people playing games. We had another person who's involved in the case who she went to her high school and reported to them that she knew classmates who were getting special accommodations for testing who didn't really deserve them. Meanwhile, her application listed her as being this tennis phenom, first generation college student, and Black, and she was none of those things. So it is a little strange that, you know, they're noting that something's wrong with the system, but they're also participating in that craziness.
Right. It feels like they seem to sort of want to justify it as if to say there's no way out, and so they're both like bemoaning the system as they're participating in it, which, you know, is something that there's an element that you sort of, or at least I, you know, listening to them and the way you kind of character makes me sympathize with when it feels like there's no way out. Maybe it's worth just pausing a little bit and focusing also on the way that these inequities that are so built in to whether it's how ED decisions work or even just like SAT tutoring, like even if you're doing everything legal.
Right. So I think, and this is where me being a higher ed reporter, I think comes in handy, because I've reported on and written about and spoken to people about all of these topics for a really long time, just about how admissions works, how it's intended to work, how it really, what does work, and those aren't always the same thing. So I think of everything that went on in the book, kind of in the scandal, and everything that, frankly, a lot of families here are familiar with as being on the same spectrum, just at different ends of it. So you've got the very regular run-of-the-mill things we don't think about twice. You know, you get an SAT tutor, you have a parent who happens to be college educated or a professional writer or something read over your essay and edit your essay for you. Your family pays a few $1,000s so you can join a club soccer team. And now it's $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 for some of those. You pay to go on a volunteer trip for the summer. Those all give you an edge in applying. Being at a school where your college counselor actually knows your name, that certainly gives you an edge, and many people in public schools don't have that. Being able to apply early. Your shot of getting in is significantly higher if you apply early, but not everyone can afford to do so because you can't compare aid offers if you're applying binding early decision. So that, again, if you're from a certain subset of the population, that can help you. And then it keeps going down the line. So you've got kind of the normal stuff. You've got being a legacy, being the child of an alum gives you a leg up. Knowing the president, knowing prominent people at the university gives you a leg up. Having a famous last name, having a family that has donated a lot, that gives you a huge leg up. You get a special tag at many schools if you are essentially a VIP candidate. We go a lot into just what being a VIP means at certain schools, especially at USC. It plays a really big role. And then you keep moving further down. Being first generation college student can help you. Schools want to diversify their student populations, socioeconomically, racially, and ethnically, and looking at first gen students a lot that often check a few of those boxes. Not all, not always, but often. So that helps you. And Rick Singer knew that, and he encouraged some of his families to check those boxes, that they were first gen, that they were Black, Hispanic, that they were not who they were. And then you get to being a recruited athlete, which gives you a huge advantage in admissions. And again, Singer knew that and took advantage of that. So there are so many inequities baked into the system. There are so many ways that you can get an edge. And I think the thing that's one of the judges in the criminal case referred to this a bunch, but these people who were involved in this case, they had every privilege, they had every advantage possible, and they still needed one more, or thought they needed one more, and went for it. And that's where it all came tumbling down.
Singer just kind of knew how to exploit the weak spots best, and just
very much so. Very much so.
By the way, I didn't mention as we started that we definitely want to get as many people watching in with questions as possible. So there should be a participant labeled questions or questions here. So feel free to message that at any point if you have a question for Melissa, and we'll hopefully have you jump in as quickly as we can. So turning to what Singer built, a lot of what you described is, at least especially like the legacy aspect and donations, that's what Singer would call the back door. And what he was offering was something called the side door. Can you explain what he meant?
Yeah, so he describes it a few different ways, and the way he describes it almost makes it sound legitimate, legal, really close to the back door. So in some cases, he described the side door as smaller donations, more targeted. So rather than giving $7 million to the university, which maybe would get you a second look if you're a kind of peripheral, a bubble candidate, but it's not a guaranteed in. You can give 500,000 to a smaller program, to the music program, or to an athletic team, and that makes, that matters a lot more for that small program. What it really was bribing a coach or an athletics administrator to be flagged as a recruited athlete for a team, going in as an athlete without any intention of ever playing that sport. Oftentimes they did not play the sport at all. But because athletes have such pull in admissions and often go through a parallel pathway, their applications are read separately from us common folk. It was such an easy, wide open door for his clients. And why would a coach possibly put forward somebody who wasn't going to help the team? So nobody bothered to check the credentials of these applicants to confirm that they were the MVP of whatever team or the co-captain or won all these gold medals and accolades, because a coach isn't going to waste a spot on somebody who's not qualified. So they thought. Obviously, the price tag was high enough that they were willing to.
So, and this is part of what was going on, right? Was that these coaches, let's say for sports that were less high profile, were starting to feel the burden to raise money, and so he came in and sort of offered them and basically, can you describe the range of what the money was paying for, so that the parents would pay money to Singer, and what would happen next?
Yeah, so the parents would pay money to Singer, often to Singer's charity under the guise of a donation, so they could get a tax write-off on their payment for illicit services. The money would then go, essentially money laundering, right? It would go through his charity and then to either the university. So sometimes it would go to an account run by this athletics administrator at USC, and then she could boast of, hey, I raised X million dollars this year. A lot of it through this pathway, but her higher ups approved because it looked good that she was raising all this money. It could also go to, in some cases, it helped pay for private school for some of the coaches' kids. So he made scholarships. He essentially made tuition payments for the coaches' kids. In one case, he handed over a bag of cash in a car at a hotel parking lot in the middle of the night. So in some cases it went to the university and it actually did in some way help the program. But in many cases, it also just went straight into the coach's pockets. So there's one coach who used to be at Georgetown, the tennis coach there. He's pleaded not guilty, but the prosecutors have said that he got more than $2 million himself through this scheme.
I'm not sure if this is the same coach, but a lot of the parents, it sounded like from the way you described it, wanted to make it. The other allure of the nonprofit of making donations he sort of gave them a cover of they were making donations to help underserved kids, and so that was, I guess, some parents decided to believe that or chose to try to convince themselves of that. And tell me, there was one story where someone thought they were making a donation. In this case, I think to the athletics department, and they were surprised when the coach didn't necessarily have the same understanding.
Right. So there's this one parent who he was an alum of Georgetown, and he was on campus, and he really wanted his son to go there. And he had been a tennis player himself, so he called up Singer while he was on campus and said, Rick, I really want Junior to go here. Is it feasible? And Singer responded, I can make it happen. For, I don't remember the exact dollar amount, a couple $100,000 donation to the tennis team. Yes. So he set up that day a meeting with the coach. The father went and met with the coach in the coach's office, and the father wanted to learn, what's the money going toward? Is it for travel? Is it for uniforms? And from how the father explained it to us, the coach's response was, well, coach has got to eat.
Yeah.
That was it. So the father declined, did not participate in that approach, but yeah, the coach had to eat. So a couple $100,000 extra dollars to help him eat.
Yeah, it's and it's wild to imagine that I'm sure there were other parents who heard that and kind of perfectly went along with it.
Absolutely.
So that sort of, and I guess the last thing to say about the athletics piece of what Singer was doing was can you talk about how the kids, what happened, how, I guess both how the kids had to pretend they were athletes to the degree they did and what happened when they got to campus?
Right. So in some cases, the kids never knew that their parents were pitching them as athletes because Singer and his team would submit the final application for them to the college. So they never saw it. They would, potentially forge the signature, or the kid would have signed it, and then it was submitted with a new essay kind of slipped in. In other cases, the kid knew that there was something weird going on, but not the extent of it. So there was one kid whose father asked him to pose in the family swimming pool in a water polo, in a swimsuit and water polo cap with a ball. And, he said, like, it seemed weird, but my dad asked me to do it. And I don't question my dad. I didn't question my dad, so I did it. And it would, make him more interesting on his application or something. But it was way more than that. And then there were some kids who were totally in on it and understood that they were going to be pitched as, a rower or a coxswain. And that if anybody asked, they could say, oh, I was injured, or, oh, I just decided I want to focus on academics. So once they got to school, they weren't actually expected to join the team in any way. There are a few close calls where, an academic advisor said, oh, you shouldn't be signing up for classes on Fridays because you'll have to travel with the team. And the kid was like, what team? I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not a pole vaulter. But even those, there was always a way around it. There was this kind of closed loop of, if anyone was going to ask questions, the person to answer them was somebody who was in on the scheme.
And Singer was quick to find a way to solve any of those holes that came up.
Yeah, for sure.
And so then the other sort of, it seemed like athletics was kind of one weak spot that he exploited, and the other big one seemed to be standardized testing. And like on one hand, the first thing he does is he helps kids get extra time, which seems, awful, but not that remarkable. But like it goes much further than that.
Right. So he really was able to exploit these long existing loopholes in SAT and ACT administration. So he would have the kids go to get an analysis, get tested for learning differences so they could get extra time on the test. And the goal was to get 100% extra time, which meant that they didn't have to take it at their school on a Saturday or their school at all. They could go to another testing center. He had at least one doctor that he worked with regularly that he recommended families go to, or that he sent to families to do the testing. She was never charged with anything, but it's in part because it's a very subjective battery of tests. So it's easy enough for somebody to get sign off and say, yes, I have a learning difference. So they'd get 100% extra time. They would then register to take the test at either this high school in Houston or this small private high school in LA, where he was paying off the test site administrators. And then he had the test proctor. He flew in from Florida, this guy who worked at IMG Academy, a Harvard grad who had this uncanny ability to get any score you wanted on the tests. And he did test prep for students at IMG. That was his job. So he knew these tests very well. He would proctor the test. So sometimes that meant the kid would take the test and then he would fix the answers after. Sometimes he would just feed the right answers to the students. And in one case, he took the test on behalf of a student who was homesick in another state. So he was very good at his job, and he would get paid over the course of a number of years, $200,000 for this. And he'd swoop in, take the test, fix the answers, head home. And then the score was sent off, and oftentimes the kid had no idea that this happened to them.
That's the most remarkable part.
Taking the test.
What were some of the things the parents would tell their kids to explain?
Rick Singer would often recommend a bar mitzvah or a wedding. We're going to go look at camp colleges down in Houston, or, we were going to be on vacation in LA anyway, so let's just do this while we're there. We don't want you to miss a couple days of school to do it. He had an excuse or a rationale for everything.
And what were some of the things you heard, I guess, from parents when they were trying to explain to you why they did this? Like, what were some of the most compelling justifications or the most outrageous justification? Can you give me a range of what you heard?
There was definitely a range, and even some who pleaded guilty and admitted to a judge, yes, I did this, yes, I knew it was wrong, have still not quite taken ownership of their actions, I would say, and still want to say, well, Singer really, he just worked me over. I was a target for him. I stood no chance against his wily ways, sort of thing. But a lot of them acknowledged, both kind of looking back saying, I knew this was wrong at the moment, or at least afterwards saying, yeah, I did something wrong. And we've had parents say it was their own ego. I wanted this for me. I thought it would be a good look for me if my kid went to this school, or I expected more of my kid than what they were giving me, or than, you know, it's just different than what my kid wanted. And they recognized it was about them, not about their kid. Some talk about just being insecure and really not knowing who to turn to for advice. So when they were recommended to Singer, they just ate up every word because he just seemed to know it all. A lot talk about fear, that, you know, they're going to leave their kid behind somehow in this process, which when you think about what high schools these kids went to, what connections their parents had, they're all going to be just fine. So that's a slightly tougher kind of explanation to swallow, perhaps. But I do think there's something relatable in a lot of what the parents said, and that's some kind of hard to accept, that, yeah, I saw myself in some of these parents. I want the best for my kid. Now, I'm not willing to go that far for her, but I understand that urge and that need to help your child along as best as you possibly can.
And a lot of times there are these sort of heartbreaking descriptions, and I don't know how much of it is, but some of it you kind of paint sympathetically, where parents seem to think that it's, you know, a result of something that happened to family, or, you know, that they didn't do enough for their kids, and so they kind of take on whatever was going on in the family, and that's the justification for wanting to help their kids more, because they didn't get the shot to be the person they should be, or, you know. And so it's sort of like outrageous that then the next step is that you go fly across the state and get them to do a fraudulent SAT. But there's this, it's, in some cases it seems to come from a weirdly caring parental place.
It is. They do oftentimes mean well. They do want to help their kid. They just go about it a very strange way, and
And
often
with total blinders on.
hurt them more.
Yeah. So how did this kind of outrageous scheme where people were flying across the country to take SATs and posing for pictures as water polo players, it seems like there should be a lot of cracks, but how did this start getting undone?
It's a very roundabout tale. This guy named Maury Tobin, who grew up in Montreal and then lived in LA, he was nabbed for a securities fraud case, completely unrelated to all of this. And that was out of the prosecutor's office in Boston. A lot of people ask why this case is in Boston when so many of the families are in California, and this is why. So, securities fraud, they were looking through, he was taking a plea deal, they were looking through his financials, and they realized that he had a ton of money moving from his account to the account of the then women's soccer coach at Yale. And they asked about it, and they learned, oh, well, he was paying off the coach to admit his daughter as a recruit. They then nabbed the coach, who mentioned Rick Singer's name. So this coach was taking money on the side. He was taking money through Rick Singer. He was busy. He was since fired. But he flipped and told him everything he knew about Rick Singer. He wore a wire in some meetings and on the phone, and then they were able to get enough material to get a wire on Rick Singer. They had a wire up on him for a number of months when he was closing deals with some of the high-profile families, or calling them using scripts to say, hey, remember that time I helped you bribe that coach and we wrote it off as a tax thing? They didn't know that was going on, but the prosecutors got all of it on wire, and then were able to bring the whole case down.
One shocking thing is you talk about Singer sort of, when he's initially caught, he seems to like not fully, and I don't know how skeptical you are of this, but you say that he wasn't aware that what he was doing was literally a bribe. He thought that there could be a legal case to make for paying off coaches.
Yes. So at the beginning, he really resisted kind of accepting that what he was doing was illegal, that this was more just, well, I'm helping out a coach and things like that. So it's a tough sell, yeah. But he ultimately did cooperate with prosecutors and gave his entire Rolodex and dozens of names. So he admitted it at the end. Sorry, my daughter just walked in. So,
Just let her join the Bronfman call. Like that's what it's about.
So he ultimately did cooperate, and he saw the system. From what people around him say, he often talked about. He saw the system as being broken. he recognized that the system was broken, and he just found ways to help his clients through that broken system. With his justification.
That's a great place to bring. Noah has a question that ties in exactly to that. So Noah, do you want to jump in with what you were thinking?
Yeah, Melissa, I am so excited for this book, and I haven't gotten my copy yet, but it's on order at my local bookstore. I'm pumped. So I'm thinking about a couple of different things, and I think I've got a like kind of confused and muddled question that I'm hoping you will find something to say in response to. I don't know that there are answers. So one thing that I'm thinking about is at 17. We sort of imagine college admissions to be like objective, right? It like says something about, it's like a clear-eyed evaluation of who you are, and it's like objective, and it's meritocratic, and it's professional. And one thing that this narrative does, and what I'm anticipating your book doing, is showing just like how human and political and messy the process is, even sort of outside of the scandals, right? But like the ordinary, like the thing that we think is ethical, right? It's like influenced by one fundraiser's relationship with a donor, or like by the coach, like which 17-year-old the coach thinks is going to be best at lacrosse. And so I'm wondering how this story and scandal should change how we think about colleges and rankings and like prestige and the prestige ecosystem of higher ed. And I'm thinking about that also in this moment when higher ed is being attacked for political reasons, right? Higher ed is sort of the always under attack from the right for indoctrination, and parents are seeing sticker prices and are upset about that, understandably. Like, what does this do, and how does this fit into sort of ongoing challenges to higher ed's reputation and trust from like students and parents and the public? One other thing that I like, I'm just bouncing around in here is how colleges' responses to the COVID pandemic also feel like they're dangerous for the reputation of colleges, right? Like, we're seeing college presidents say things like we're reopening and it's going to be fine, and everybody's going to be on campus, and we're going to be very safe. And it's like obviously not true. And so like, what does this do to colleges' reputations as like trustworthy institutions?
Yeah, I think people have long questioned how much to trust colleges, whether it's through admissions, oh, they must have gotten that wrong because so-and-so didn't get in, or they must have gotten it wrong because someone else did. I would recommend a wonderful book by a guy named Dan Golden called The Price of Admission that goes pretty deep into just how much money you can buy in higher ed and admissions. I have it on one of my bookcases behind me, and we reference it in our book. He talks about the great Jared Kushner example of his family making some well-timed donations to Harvard, and then, shock of all shocks, Kushner got in. So I think people have known that it's not a pure meritocracy for a long time, but they still want to believe that it is, right? You still want to believe when it's you or your family member or your friend or your student that they are a good kid. They deserve to get in. They should get in. And unfortunately, that just doesn't happen always, especially now at some schools where admit rates are 5, 6, 7%. I mean, a few schools now don't even give their admit rates publicly because they know it's going to scare people off from applying. So it is an opaque, messy, very imperfect system. And I talk to a lot of admissions directors who say, like, we want holistic admissions. That's a big word they use, holistic. We want to look at more than just test scores, more than just GPAs. We want to know what this person has overcome. Well, that comes up with another problem. And I've heard from families that say, I'm a upper middle class white family from suburban Florida. What do I do to make myself not seem so white? I have not overcome anything in my life. How do I still get into college? And that is a legitimate, it is a real concern from families, whether or not it's, the biggest concern in the grand scheme of things. That is something that some families think about and question. So I think this scandal makes the system just, we see so many more warts in the system with this scandal. And I think we saw some initial steps toward cleaning that up. I think the pandemic, and let me say what some of those steps were. So some schools said, okay, we will now check the credentials or audit applications to make sure that when someone says that they are captain of their varsity whatever team, that they actually were, or that they volunteered 80 hours a week somewhere, that they actually did. So some schools have said they're going to audit, check that. Some schools said, if you're getting in as a recruited athlete, we're going to check that you're actually on the roster. And if you're not, you better have a good explanation. Okay, those are small steps. But then pandemic hit, and you have schools now under such budget crunches that they absolutely are looking differently at a student who is full pay, or a student whose parents can say, by the way, we also, we're thinking of giving $50,000 a year to the fitness center. And they can't help but give those people a closer look right now, because for these institutions, it's an existential crisis with the pandemic and the financial hit of all of that. So I tend to be a pretty skeptical, negative person to begin with. And I think this current moment, I want to believe that there will be change. I think in reality, we will see some backsliding on schools' efforts toward socioeconomic, racial, and ethnic diversity, because frankly, they just feel that they can't afford to keep doing it right now. So if anything, the pandemic makes these efforts to clean up the system kind of put them on the back burner a little bit more. And for those of you who don't know, Noah studies this stuff, so I feel like he's the one who should be answering his own question. But Noah knows more than anyone, I think, about the history of higher ed fundraising and a lot of higher ed finance. And he was also one of the multiple people who called this whole thing blood sport.
Wow. So Noah, if you have any other things to jump in with, please definitely do. I guess so. Would you say, Melissa, you were optimistic that this would have maybe raised awareness and made different before the pandemic? Like, did you see that sort of going on, or not even necessarily?
So last summer, I'd say I was hopeful, right? You had some schools coming out with statements saying, we're going to be doing these audits, we're going to be doing these checks, we are aware that there are some problems in the system. And then last September, I went to Louisville, Kentucky for a convention of a few thousand admissions consultants, admissions officers, guidance counselors, and very quickly lost much of that hope, because this line echoed over and over while I was there. This was not an admissions scandal. That was the party line, word for word, and talk about it in the book. Well, no admissions officers were charged. Rick
in a very literal sense.
Really an admissions counselor, so he doesn't count. So no, it wasn't. It was an athletic scandal. It was a testing scandal, but it wasn't an admissions scandal. It was what they kept saying, and that made me just very quickly realize, okay, they're not taking ownership of it. Not that it was their, this organization's fault, but as the system. So I started to get a little more back to my normal cynical self pretty quickly after that. And then with the pandemic, it really has put a lot of these discussions, just sidelined them for a little while as schools are figuring out, are we going to have enough students to fill a class? And at what point do we have, how many students need to die before we shut back down mid-semester, which our conversations are having.
Yeah. No, that's wild. What would you say though is the sort of like the move away from standardized tests? That's been a trend that's happening. Do you think that's something that's going to have that's going to make improve access to higher education?
I'm really hopeful on that one, I will say. I think a lot of institutions had gone test optional, and with the pandemic, because people just couldn't go to take their SAT or ACT, and still are having trouble doing so. A lot of schools have said, at least for this year, for the next couple of years, we're not going to require that. there is a ton of research showing that test scores correlate, don't really predict college success. They predict certain parts of college success, but not graduation rates or longer term outcomes, and they don't do a better job than your high school GPA. And there's a lot of research that shows close correlation between test score and race and socioeconomic status. Again, okay, that doesn't tell you how well you're doing college. It says what color your skin is or how much money is in your family's bank account. So why use those? A lot of schools went test optional for a little while. We'll see if they stick to it. I mean, the entire Ivy League did, and the entire UC system are moving away from it. That's extraordinary. But we'll see if it sticks. The UC system is trying to find some other way of assessing something. They still need to figure out what it is they want to assess. The admissions directors at schools that have gotten rid of it say, yeah, we're doing just fine, and our class is more diverse than it was before, because we're not saying, no, you can't come here because you got an 1100 rather than a 1400. So that's a good sign. That's a good step. But we have to still see if it sticks and what other measures admissions offices use to assess candidates, right? An SAT score, an ACT score is an easy thing to look at. It's a quick number that presumably tells you something about how qualified this candidate is. It's a lot harder to read a long essay and read through recommendation letters and things like that. They just don't have the time with the volume of applications they get.
So that's one really small kind of potential positive trend. The other thing that was interesting in the book, you often kind of compare the issues going on, or the corruption, or the kind of the sort of poor structure of incentivization at USC with Occidental College. Is there anything there that you think you highlight that they're doing better?
So yeah, we talk a little about Occidental, and they're two very different schools, but we talk a little bit about how Singer got turned away from Occidental when he tried to make inroads with some wealthy clients who wanted to attend, and the school was like, we don't care that they want to give a donation. She's not qualified to attend. End of discussion. And he got really upset by that. But at USC, it was a little different. There was just this immense pressure to raise money in all corners of the campus, and Singer knew that, and Singer took advantage of it. And I think we talk a lot about just how USC has changed over the years. It had the nickname University of Spoiled Children, University of Second Choice, and it's now almost as hard to get into as some of the Ivies. I think a lot of people are still surprised by that, but it is. And this is a school that, if you're, especially in the LA area, it is an aspirational school that comes with so many wonderful connections, being part of that alumni association. So it is just a sought after institution. And when you combine this fervor and this enthusiasm around admissions with a very open hunt for funds, you're going to end up with this very messy situation as they had. At the same time, a school can't be faulted for fundraising. That is how it exists. That's how it continues on for the next many generations. And Occidental, which hasn't pursued the fundraising as much, doesn't have, its facilities aren't as nice. It doesn't draw some of the same faculty because it doesn't pay as much. So there's trade-offs there. But I think schools do need to think about the relationship between their development and admissions offices.
And those are definitely tricky relationships to maintain in a morally coherent way. So I guess as we wrap up, and definitely if anyone has any last minute questions, I'd love to get them in. One sort of tangential question that I'm curious about. It's just the book is remarkable, and if anyone on the call hasn't gotten it, you should definitely get your copy of Unacceptable now. But it's hard to kind of thread that needle between raising these big societal questions and then making me feel like I understand what's going on in these different characters' heads. Some of them who are pretty odious or despicable. So how did you get these people to? What was the experience of getting some of these people to speak to you?
Yeah. So Jennifer, my co-author, and I, she's based up in Boston, and we've both been on the story since the day it broke. So I think the fact that we've known every development in it, and that we weren't just kind of jumping in to write this book and then leaving again, but we've invested so much time in it and understand, we've read every freaking court document, thousands of pages of filings. I have like dog-eared copies of this FBI affidavit that was 200 pages that came out in last March. Like, we know it so well, we understand it so well, and we started making inroads with everybody on day one. So we had a large Google Doc and a big whiteboard at my office, kind of slowly, it probably looked like something a conspiracy theorist does, and perhaps it was, kind of slowly piecing together who's connected to whom, who introduced which family to Singer, and which connection was that, and it's very beautiful mind sort of thing. But it did help us understand just what this universe looked like and who was connected and how. And, we reached out to people's lawyers. So if for some, it was as simple as explaining to lawyers, we know there's more to this story, let us help tell it. And that got us to an opportunity to sit down with the Stanford sailing coach the day before he was sentenced last June. And then in other cases, it was, the lawyers or their PR people, a lot of them hired crisis communications people very quickly. And they said, no, we're not going to talk. And we said, okay, that's fine. We're going to talk to people who know them. And we spoke to current and former employees or employers, current and former spouses and partners. Sometimes their kids wanted to talk to us, even if they didn't. So there's always a way around them. And then we would come back and say, listen, you're going to be in this book. We want to make sure that it's fair and that it's accurate. We want to go over what we think we know about you and about the situation. And oftentimes, once they kind of realized, okay, I can't just hide from this, oftentimes then they would engage a little bit more.
Yeah, it definitely was an impressive feat to sort of, there were moments where I found myself, I think, as I said before, rooting for Rick Singer, which I would not have thought going in. So how did you, what were some of from the kids who you spoke to? And I'm especially interested in the ones who were sort of very well kept in the dark about what was happening. How did they process it?
I think some still are processing it, right? If you learn that your parents had so little faith in you that they went to these great lengths to set life up for you, that has to be just absolutely devastating. And Felicity Huffman spoke at her sentencing about her daughter saying, in tears, why didn't you believe in me? And it's crushing for the kids, crushing for the parent. A lot of the families are in family therapy now to try to piece back together these relationships that have absolutely just been destroyed. I think for some kids, it has helped them find their voice and say, you know what, mom and dad, you don't need to run everything. I got this. So one of the kids, Mateo Sloan, the one who had been posed as a water polo player, we spoke to him and we ran a story in the journal about it. And there's more detail in the book as well of his reaction. And, he was really mad at his dad. And then eventually it turned to kind of feeling bad for him and saying, wow, your view on life is so skewed. This is really kind of sad, Dad. And I hope you figure it out and I'll be okay. And next time I'm not going to let you run the show so much. He was incredibly mature and thoughtful and articulate kid, and he's 19 now, or 19 or 20, and he's a student at USC, and he's trying to just keep living his life.
Yeah, it's amazing that, at least in that case, sounds like an opportunity for him to come into his own after that was exactly what his father was trying to protect him from.
Absolutely.
Abe has a question about financial aid and how that factored in. Do you want to jump into that, Abe?
Sure. So, Melissa, my question was, did any of your research focus on the financial aid system and how specifically the way it currently exists incentivizes admissions of donors' children and how it can be reformed?
Yeah, so it's a complicated system for sure. And the vast majority of these students were paying full freight, and then their families were making those donations on top. There were actually a few cases where they got scholarships from the schools. So the family would pay Singer tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then the student would also get a scholarship from the school for a small amount, a very partial scholarship to be a soccer player or a tennis player. But that's just how that athletic recruiting worked at that school. The book doesn't get too much into kind of donations that then go to financial aid for other students, which, some people say, oh, well, my family is donating and helping pay for 3 other students, so maybe I should deserve to get in. It's complicated, and there aren't easy answers to some of those questions, some of those issues. Hopefully the student is qualified if they're getting in, but we do talk a great deal about that gray area of just preferential admissions. The very few schools are fully need blind, meaning they don't look at financial need at all when they're looking at candidates and assessing their applications. Most schools can't afford not to pay attention to how much the family can pay. And I think, as I was saying before, with the pandemic, I think even more schools now are in that situation where you can't help but notice, okay, what do mom and dad do, and what high school are they at, and what town do they live in? Okay, that's a pretty wealthy area. Okay, let's keep that in mind as we're considering the student. Or they certainly are allowed to look at it once a kid's coming off of a wait list. Even if they're need blind in first round admissions, they might still pay attention to need on the wait list.
And that's happening more now. They're padding their acceptances with wait lists, you were saying?
Yeah, a lot of schools went much more aggressively to their wait list this year just because they don't know who's going to show up or show up virtually or whatever school looks like in the fall. They just can't predict much at all.
Yeah. So I guess sort of a last question. And so on one hand, as I was reading the book, there were those kind of caper film moments that were great. But there was also those anxiety inducing moments. And I'm, definitely not a parent, but I can't imagine sort of just seeing the arms race and seeing what these parents, it's anxiety inducing a little bit. And so I kind of wonder how you felt as you were diving into this research as a parent, and how and like maybe help us think through how to draw the line between how to function in the system that's so inequitable. What does it mean to make ethical decisions in that system?
Yeah, I think going into this project and doing this project, I didn't want to feel sympathetic toward anyone. I just wanted to be, neutral toward them all. I didn't want to hate anyone. I didn't want to love anyone. But there are certain parents where it's really hard not to relate, not to feel like, oh, I see myself in that person. Because whether you're a parent or you just have a loved one that you want to help succeed, right, you want to do what you can for them. So Felicity Huffman, for example, spoke a lot in her sentencing memo and in court, and her friends all talked about how insecure she was as a mother, how concerned she was that she just wasn't doing enough for her kids, that she was going to screw them up somehow. She was going to do it wrong. She was going to make the wrong decision. So she just sought advice from everybody. She just wanted experts to tell her how to do it better. And I, have plenty of books and expert parenting books on the side there. And I can relate to that. You want to do what's best for your kid, and you got to find what that is. I think that kind of sympathy or that kind of recognition of oneself in these parents fades away when you see exactly the lengths to which they went to get there, to get their kids that edge. But I think it does help me as a parent think about what privilege I do have. My kid's 5. She's got a while before she goes to this, but she is in a position where she has a mother who loves to write and a mother who loves to read and reads to her a lot. And not every kid has that. And I am aware that that is a fortunate position for her to be in. I think, if you have kids in high school or you're in high school now, even just acknowledging, hey, my guidance counselor knows who I am and sits down with me every week or two. That is extraordinary in a country where the counselor-student ratio in many states is upwards of 400 to 1. And that doesn't mean that you're going to fix everything all by yourself, but the first step is admitting you have a problem, that sort of thing. And I think there's something to that, acknowledging that this is an unequal, unfair system, and most of the people who are watching this, most of the people who are affiliated with Bronfman are fortunate enough to be on the right side of that equation, on the beneficiaries there. And it doesn't mean you should give up every advantage you've received, but be aware of it. And, I've looked at essays for my little cousins over the years and things like that. If somebody else were to ask me and they, weren't a family member and I could help somehow, I would, because I know that not everybody has that person at their high school, that teacher or that parent to do it for them.
So thank you so much, Melissa, for such a great conversation today and such a great book that raised so many important questions and helping us think through those questions. So what we'll do now, there's going to be a little survey that should appear in the chat that I'd love it if everybody could click when that appears. And there's also, so there it is. So if everybody could click on that before we say goodbye, it's pretty quick. So that would be much appreciated. And just as critically, Melissa's book, Becky posted as well. So if you haven't gotten that yet, please do that as well. It's a really, really great read. So I just want to thank you again, Melissa, for such a great conversation, and congratulations again on the book.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye.